Welcome to You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we're here with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital, and the first forensic veterinarian in the state of New Jersey. So I'd like to focus this program on forensics, and the first question I have is, what exactly are forensics? Are they CSI like we see on TV, or is it something more specialized than that, or is it not nearly as technologically advanced as that?
No, actually, I think TV, particularly the CSI program, the NCIS program, and a lot of cold case programs, are fairly accurate in their portrayal. They don't give you all the paperwork that goes along and the tedious work that goes along with forensics. But basically, forensics is the using of science or another art or science that can elucidate or give better understanding to the facts in either a crime or, if it's a civil case, in the civil case, in the suit. So basically what forensics does is we spend a lot of time in our specific areas. I happen to be a veterinarian, so I do veterinary forensics, crimes against or involving animals. But there are forensic accountants, there are forensic anthropologists. The forensic anthropologist is the one you might know most about, who can take a skull and build a face on it. But there are forensic pathologists, people who are physicians, who do necropsy or postmortems on people. And that's what we see the most of. So forensics encompasses a number of sciences, not just veterinarian, human physician, but also things like anthropology, engineering, accounting, photography. So a lot of the people who bring pictures up are forensic photographers, and they will bring up a better and a clearer picture of an image. And so forensics encompasses a lot of specialties, of which I happen to be educated in one area.
Well, now you mentioned just before we went on the air that you are a level 5 forensic veterinarian, and what does that mean, and what does that mean what can you do as a result of being a level 5?
Okay. Well, veterinary medicine is just starting to understand forensics and its need for veterinary science and veterinary medicine in explaining cases involving animals. We as veterinarians have the background of internal medicine, dentistry, surgery, and pathology to be able to explain certain things that have happened to an animal, certain poisoning, certain other types of things. So we as veterinarians have to sort of put together our programs, because they aren't out there yet. It's a brand new science that we're talking about, maybe established for maybe 8 or 9 years, and so we're trying to put it together. So basically, I've taken courses in criminal law, criminal investigation, criminal procedure, and most recently, as you mentioned, I worked under the auspices of the American College of Forensic Examiner Institute, and I wrote an exam and studied for a level 5 criminal or certified medical investigator. This is the same thing that the human forensic people go for. And basically what that allows me to do is go into court and testify as a medical investigator. With my background in veterinary medicine, I'm considered a veterinarian, but with this additional certification, it means that I also have some additional forensic credentials. And I intend to pursue other forensic credentials, such as crime scene investigation and also criminal investigation. So there are a number of things that I have yet to do, but I happen to be qualified in this one area at the senior level.
So how do you work with law enforcement? You just suddenly get a call saying, Dr. Rogers, show up at X spot? Or is it some other different way that how many different law enforcement agencies have you on call, first of all?
Well, I basically am a consultant to the New Jersey State SPCA, and we've had Sergeant Peterson on before.
Right.
And the NJSPCA, Humane Police, which is the enforcement branch of the SPCA, the Humane Police are involved in all crimes or cruelty or abuse of animals. And they will call me in if they feel they need me. Some investigations don't require additional input. The crime was committed, the facts are clear, the evidence has been gathered, and they go to court with that. Such as the Patrick case. If you remember Patrick was a dog that was thrown down a garbage chute in Newark. And my partner who actually has since retired, Sergeant Peterson, has made that arrest. And so the facts were clear, they were gathered. He issued the Miranda rights to the suspect. Suspect went to court, and then just recently, in fact, she was found guilty and has given up the dog. And the dog is now with a friend of mine and living quite happily. So that's one agency I work with. I have been called in by the state police and any other investigative agency that wants my help. I make myself available. I actually have a website for my company, which is called animalforensicinvestigations.com. And any police agency, any lawyer, any prosecutor who needs help can get me at that website. But it's open for anyone who needs my expertise.
So I think you mentioned that it's a new evolving field. Do people really know to call you yet, or is it still education among the law enforcement agencies that yes, there is such a thing, and yes, I'm here, and you should be calling me?
Well, I think we have to understand that in veterinary forensics, when we're talking about a crime against an animal, we might go to a prosecutor and say, this is a crime against an animal. And the prosecutor looks at his table and he says, well, let's see, I have 2 rapes, 3 murders, and 2 child molestations. Where do you want me to put that in among all these other, what I consider more serious cases?
Right.
And my job in educating both other forensic officers, but also the judiciary, the judges, the prosecutors and lawyers, are that you have to realize that animal abuse is often tied to other things. The original was talking about the McDonald triad, where they talked about animal abuse, fire starting, and bedwetting as being the 3 things that serial killers have in common. Well, that isn't necessarily the case. But certainly animal abuse has been tied to domestic violence, has been tied to child molestation, has been tied to violent crimes. And that's what I'm trying to bring out to our judiciary and our lawyers, that, hey, this animal abuse is important. And once they start understanding that, they'll understand how prosecuting these people put them on the map, and when more violent crimes occur or other crimes occur, they become more of a suspect because they do have that background. It's sort of the issue of, say, a drunk driver not getting caught 10 times, and then finally he kills someone. Well, if he had been caught and had been noted that he had been stopped, and that he was taken in for drunk driving and he blew and he was under the limit but still had been drinking, those things sort of pile up against him until finally you realize he's done this 5 or 10 times. So it's sort of the same thing with animal crimes. I think we can use them as a backdrop to understand other crimes, such as child abuse, child molestation, domestic violence, especially domestic violence.
Mm-hmm. So really what you're saying then, just to summarize, is that it's a prelude to violence against humans. It very often takes place first with pets or animals.
I think there is a link there. I don't know we can say it's a prelude. Not everyone that's abusive to animals will go on to be a serial killer or a child abuser or a domestic violence. But there is some reason, there is a level of concern.
A proclivity.
There is a proclivity, and there is an understanding that if 10 people are in the room and 2 are abusers and they're all suspects, the more likely ones might be the animal abusers. Mm-hmm. That's not to say they are the only ones, and they don't have to be the ones, but I think that gives us an insight into the mind of the person. And so that's why in working with the law enforcement officers that I do, in working with the lawyers, the prosecutors, and the judiciary, we try to have them understand the broader understanding or the broader significance of animal crimes.
Okay. How many cases have you been involved with so far?
Well, between crime scene investigation, consultation, and animals being brought to me where I've done the postmortems on them, I think at this point it's in the 40 to 50 range.
Oh, that is significant.
Yeah, I mean, this is a significant crime. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not prosecuted either because we don't have all the evidence, or it's very difficult to prosecute someone either because of their stature in the community or because we can't tie them directly. And part of that is because when we have someone who goes out to the crime scene, if it's a police officer, whether it's a police officer or an animal control officer, or anyone else who goes out to a crime scene, if the information at the crime scene is not gathered properly, it can be tainted. And that's where veterinary forensics becomes so important. As you'll see, after the break, we're going to go over some of the things that I do. But we really break it down into four things. We go out to the crime scene and evaluate the crime scene, measure things, look for things, and photograph things. We then gather evidence. We then take that evidence back to a lab and analyze that evidence. And then we present that evidence in court, either through a report or through sitting in the courtroom in front of a judge and jury. So we have a lot to do with how the outcome of a crime occurs. If we don't gather things properly, no matter who you are as a forensic investigator, if you don't gather information properly or catalog it properly, you end up with a case that might not be very effective.
What types of animals do you do forensic investigations for? I'm assuming large animals like horses and dogs and cats, but I mean, would you also do a forensic veterinarian investigation on a dead bird, for example, or a hamster, or some other smaller animal? Is there a limit, in other words, to what you investigate?
No, there's no limit. Any animal, and we sort of, I don't want to say that we limit ourselves to warm-blooded animals, but those are the ones that are more likely to be called in. Fish and turtles aren't always called in, but I have had a case with a turtle. I've had cases with rats, and a lot of that is related to rats and mice are related to pet stores who grow them up for food for other reptiles, and that disturbs some people, so that will become an issue. How they handle the rats and mice before they're dispatched to the owner who uses them as food is an issue. So that can be part of an investigation, and has been one of my investigations. I've worked with goats, I've worked with horses, I've worked with dogs and cats, but obviously the sensitivities of society are greater with dogs and cats and maybe even horses than we see with goats and cattle. But we do see other animals being abused, and there have been a number of people who have looked at abuse of farm animals as well as wild animals. Though wild animals belong to the state, if they are abused or if there's cruelty, then we are expected to step in and make those investigations. And of course, we work hand in hand with Fish and Wildlife of the state.
Okay, we have to take a break, but as soon as the
Great.
break is over, we're going to look at some of the tools that you use. This is You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton with Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital. We'll be right back.
Television is a powerful and influential medium that allows different groups the opportunity to produce programming that directly affects their own communities. Public, educational, and government access channels ensure that all people, regardless of race, age, gender, disability, religion, or economic status, have access to local government information and the use of a public communication forum. Make sure everyone has a voice. Support your local PEG channels.
Welcome back to You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital. And we are, in this episode, discussing forensic veterinarians. And I'd like to focus now on the actual crime scene. You've been called by the SPCA of New Jersey. They tell you to go to a town where there appears to have been a crime against an animal. What exactly do you do? Can you show us your tools as you're doing this?
Sure, certainly. First, let me point out that we work hand in hand with law enforcement, whether that's the local law enforcement or whether that's the NJSPCA Humane Police. A lot of the crimes that we deal with, or some of the crimes that we deal with, involve dog fighting, and that also involves gangs and guns and drugs. And so we also work with the New Jersey State SWAT team, because we as humane police are not equipped to go in and handle that kind of level of potential violence.
Right.
And so we work with all different kinds. So let's just say this is a simple crime scene where an animal is found outside and poisoned, which is one of my cases that I've had. So if we have an animal found outside, inside, and poisoned, I might get a call from the New Jersey State SPCA, and they'll say, we have a poisoned cat. Can you come out and take a look and see what's going on? So I'll come out, and I might go out. My most important instrument, the most important thing I have is this camera. This camera allows me to record where the animal is, what's around the animal, what the animal may have eaten. Has the animal vomited? Has the animal ingested something that makes its tongue green? So before I do anything else, I want to record everything about that animal, where it is, before I move anything. I also want to record the surroundings. That might not just be 10 feet around, it might be 20 feet around where the animal came from, or maybe where there's evidence going away or coming into the animal. So I will use this camera to record all the evidence before I do anything else.
Okay.
So once I get through with the camera and recording, and I also use the video mode, I might actually want to find and collect evidence. So this is a classic evidence bag, and what it is
this way.
what it is it's a paper bag that allows me to put in certain types of evidence. Other types of evidence we might actually put in plastic bags. So we collect the evidence, we put the type of evidence, when it was collected, where it was collected, who collected it, and where it's going. So we develop what we call a chain of custody. The chain of custody says where I got it, who it went to, what lab it went to, and who did the analysis. So once we've collected the information that we need, we obviously want to seal this so that people understand that it has been sealed and I'm the only one who's touched it. And then we put evidence tape over it to maintain that seal. When it arrives at the lab, if it's my lab, I'll cut it beyond the seal to show that this has always been sealed from the time it left me to the time it arrived at the lab. So that's the initial evidence gathering. We gather evidence in many different ways, and there are a couple of ways. Sometimes evidence is hidden, as you can imagine. So if we have to look behind a wall, I have this little instrument which allows me to look. I can drill a little hole and look behind the wall. So as you can see, there's a little light at the end. I can put it in behind the wall and look and see what's going on behind the wall, behind furniture, without having to move the furniture or the wall. So this is very important to me. Should I happen to find something, I then have a little grabber instrument that I can grab, and it again also has a light, and that allows me to grab any evidence that I might see. Certainly, anytime we're dealing with evidence, we want to be as careful as we possibly can. So when I go to the evidence scene, I might put on booties. I may or may not put on a full jumpsuit, and I'll wear gloves at all times. That way, I'm not contaminating the evidence, and if it goes to court, the court can't complain, or the lawyer can't complain that I contaminated the evidence, and therefore the poison was on my hands and not found in the animal or around the animal, or the gunshot that I found was not part of what I brought. So I have to be very careful about how I document evidence, and that's why the camera is so important. So that's the first step we go. I might actually, if you want to pick up that white thing and just show it to the camera, okay?
Here it is right here.
This is for collecting DNA.
Oh, for heaven's
So
sakes.
we will collect DNA from an animal, and we will see exactly whether or not that animal was the animal that we saw at the crime scene, whether or not that animal was another animal involved in another crime or belonged to someone else. And that way, this helps us when we do DNA at the crime scene. This is our collection kit, and this is what we use.
And do you do that for every crime scene?
Not every crime scene. It really depends on the crime and what evidence is needed. Sometimes when I'm called to a crime scene, I'm only needed there to pick up the body, or someone can pick up the body for me and bring it to me, and once it's at my lab, then I do what we call a necropsy.
Right.
Now, so we've stepped away from the crime scene investigation. We've gathered our evidence. We've gathered the body. We've gathered all the other information. Now we're at the lab area. And so this is the second part of forensics. I use my different tools and instruments to assess whether or not we have a crime. So realistically, when an animal dies, it can die accidentally, and I have to be able to determine whether it's accidental, whether it was a malicious crime, someone tried to kill the animal, whether it was something where the animal died of natural causes. So all those are things that I use a necropsy. A necropsy is actually an autopsy on an animal. So when we do an autopsy on an animal, We call it a necropsy. Once I get through my necropsy, I can then have better ideas as to what is going on with that animal. Was it poisoned? Was it shot? Was it hung? And those things are all things that I try and determine from my necropsy. So that's part of what happens at the lab. Also at the lab, let's say, for instance, there's a hole in the dog. I want to know if that's a hole from a gunshot, or could it be a pellet, or what is it? So we have this. If it is a gunshot, we use this, which is actually a gunshot residue test. And I can take a buffer or a cloth and wipe it across the gunshot and see whether or not there actually is any gunshot residue. Clearly, this is only effective if the gunshot was in close enough range to deposit some of the soot from the bullet onto the animal.
Right.
I can also use that if I know that there's a shooter and I want to establish that he shot the gun. I can use that. Then a lot of times, and this is what I tell all my officers, when we go into a room and we see that there is blood all over, we want to be sure that we're dealing with an animal crime and not a human crime. As soon as we think it's a human crime because we find a finger in the corner or we don't know and there's blood all over, we have to be so careful that we don't mess it up for our human counterparts, our police officers who are coming in to do the crime analysis for the human part of it. So we use this kit, and this kit is actually allows us to identify human blood from animal blood. And when we do that, it just allows us to say, okay, this is animal blood, this is animal blood, this is animal blood. We have an animal crime scene. As opposed to this is animal blood, this is human blood. Okay, we don't know what we have. Let the forensic guys from the police department who investigate human crimes, let them come in when they're finished and we'll do our stuff.
I'm sort of curious, and maybe this is an unfair question to ask, but what is the difference between human and animal blood that you can use this tool and be able to tell that it was human versus animal?
Well, basically, this tool can't tell you what kind of animal it is, but what it does have in it, it has something called an antibody, which reacts with the blood. So you have an antibody that's specific for humans. And when you put a drop of blood in with a drop of antibody and you see a reaction, that's when you know it's human. It won't tell you if it's dog, cat, bovine, equine. It just tells you that it's not human.
It's not human. Okay,
It's not human.
I'm with you.
And interestingly enough, I've been approached on another case that has nothing to do with a crime scene, that has to do with a sample where I've been asked to establish whether or not it's an animal sample or a human sample. And so not all forensics deals with crime. Sometimes we're just dealing with everyday questions where people are interested in getting the answers.
Okay.
So finally, at the crime scene, if I happen to be, so now we're going back to the crime scene, if I happen to be at the crime scene and there is, I think there's been a crime and there's no blood that I can see, I want to find the blood that is not available or not obvious, so it's called latent blood. I can use these two. One is luminol.
Let's bring these out so we can see them here. Okay.
One is luminol, the other one is blue star. And these both allow me to see blood that has been attempted to wipe up. So you see it quite often in the CSI movies where they spray this and they turn off the lights and they use a UV light, as I would,
yes.
And all of a sudden it lights up. And what you're seeing when it lights up is you're seeing the reaction of this with the light to blood. Now, these don't always show blood. You can have confusing chemicals, but you have to know what you're looking and how to use them to actually be able to determine that, yes, that is blood. Once we determine that, we will photograph it, and we can even take a DNA sample with this particular product. So if we find blood, you can take a DNA sample and say, yes, there was a bloody, something happened here, and it was a dog, and this is the dog. So you can take a DNA sample. Let's see. Obviously, if I have an animal that's been involved in a bite scenario, I use this. They look like little shovels.
Yes, they do.
But what they actually are dental trays. And so what I'll do is I'll use these and I'll put almost plasticine in there, push it up against the dental work of the animal, and I'll be able to get an impression of the animal and then determine whether or not that animal is the one that bit or has been biting someone. We're using the dental impression.
Same thing a dentist does if you're getting a crown or something like that.
Correct.
The very same type of impression.
And there are forensic odontologists. So my job as a veterinarian would be to get the impression, and then we'd pass it on to a forensic odontologist or someone who does dental comparisons. And we would allow him to go ahead and make that comparison because we aren't an expert in everything.
So, this is offbeat question, but if the animal is still alive and it's a case of potential biting or something like that, little difficult getting a dental impression, isn't it?
Well, you knock them out and take it.
Yeah, okay.
And then I guess we have to talk about the last part of this just before we end. And after you've gathered your information, you've put it all down, you have it all properly annotated, you go to court. And you present this as a scientist and as an expert witness. You're only an expert witness if the court says you're an expert witness. So they look at your credentials, which is why my CMI, my Certified Medical Investigator, is so important. Because when I go in front of a judge, he wants to see my credentials and why should you be presenting this evidence and are you really the right person? So he will actually say, yes, you're an expert witness, go ahead and present. And then I present my evidence and I have to meet certain criteria under the federal rules of evidence to be able to present that, and only some presentations are allowed.
Okay. We've run out of time. And I want to thank you very much, though, because this has been very, very interesting. This is You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital. Thank you very much for